Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. It is, of course, not Monday today. It is Wednesday. Of course, we had an episode last week, so that pushed this week's episode to Wednesday, but we will be back on our normal Monday schedule next week. But we've got a terrific episode today, and there is just one topic in particular I really wanted to discuss that came up actually after Monday, and I wouldn't have been able to discuss it on Monday, so it's a good thing that I waited. There is much wailing and gnashing of the teeth over Tucker Carlson going to visit Hungary. All this throughout this week, he is filming or recording his show from Hungary, and people are very upset about it because they have this impression that Hungary is this right-wing dictatorship. That there is no freedom there. That it is complete fascism there, and white supremacy and every other terrible thing that you could imagine is going on in Hungary. And now the number one cable news show in America is filming there, and this is just unbelievable. And of course, they all talked about how Tucker Carlson is going to speak at a far-right conference over the weekend. So there is much talk and much discussion over Hungary. And many of the attacks on Hungary, most of the critics have ditched any self-awareness of what country they live in or any of the developments of the West and have portrayed Hungary as this horrible totalitarian nightmare just because it has a right-wing government that doesn't allow in many immigrants, and it's also just recently passed a law banning LGBT propaganda to children because, as we all know, you have a constitutional right to send LGBT propaganda to children. The children must be exposed to this. I mean, if the founding fathers found out that our leaders had banned this, they would be rolling in their graves. I mean, this is how they really imagine themselves, is that they think that all these things are embedded in our constitutional order, and without this, we don't have a democracy. As they always like to talk about, our slide to democracy. And even with this trip over with Tucker, this is just like a private citizen going over. Yes, he has a big cable news show, but like, what's going to happen just by him visiting? And the whole impression is that somehow by him going over there, this shows the creeping authoritarianism on the right. The right is abandoning liberalism and liberal democracy, and he's going to go over to Hungary. He's going to bring terrifying ideas over here, and we're going to lose all our freedom just because he took a trip to Hungary and spoke at a certain conference. And as I was saying before, I'll read some of these critics to really show how stupid they are. These critics are pretty much saying, are attacking Hungary for many of the things that are happening here and to a far worse degree. So two of the people I want to highlight who got really mad about this Tucker trip are David Frum, neoconservative intellectual, writes for The Atlantic. He's also the person who coined axis of evil. He was a Bush speechwriter, and he's also just been a very influential figure, a very insidious individual. He's always over there, and I love his Twitter obby because it's like really ugly. And it's like really like the Twitter obby. Whenever he tweets something, it's just like arrogant and condescending. You just want to tweet out the photo of just like, this is the person saying that. And he's also very, very short. I've met him once, and he's like 5'6", 5'5", and he's one of these liberals who's always like, these guys don't know what real masculinity is, and I know what real masculinity is. And he's like a short dork who writes columns that liberal elites approve of. Like, yeah, that's what makes you a real man. But all these people like always talk about that, and he has a real hatred for Tucker. We've talked about him before. I think we talked about him last time. He called that Tucker was the real warmonger during the Iraq War, because even though, of course, David Frum was you could have argued he was one of the architects of the Iraq War due to his role in the Bush administration and him coining the word axis of evil. He said that Tucker was far more responsible for advocating for the Iraq War because he talked about it on CNN, and in this whole Twitter thread he had a few months ago, he was basically exculpated himself from any responsibility for the Iraq War. And he's like, oh, I was just a disinterested supporter of the Iraq War. I wasn't writing several columns with the Bush administration's help in order to get America into war. I was just a disinterested observer. But Tucker was far more bloodthirsty than me. And of course, he doesn't apologize for the Iraq War. But that is a digression. He had a hilarious thread about Hungary, which, as I said, pretty much, had a self-awareness scale that was off the charts. There was no self-awareness there at all. Fromm had this long thread calling about how Orban is a crook because his family has wealth, once again ignoring how American politicians use their prestige and power to enrich themselves. I mean, we can see this with the Hunter Biden, the many scandals going on with Hunter Biden, the many scandals with the Clinton Foundation, the fact that Obama is throwing an obscene 60th birthday party for himself, where he's inviting Pearl Jam and 700 guests to Martha's Vineyard. I'm sure this costs somewhere in the millions just to throw himself a birthday party, at least six figures. And, and then there's Nancy Pelosi's husband, who enriched himself by selling Google stock just before Congress, decided to take action against tech companies. You're like, oh, wow, I can't believe that a politician would get wealthy through his power and prestige. Imagine that happening in America. But anyway, he had this tweet about Hungary, which is, once again, had no awareness of where he was, of what country he lives in. He said, I visited Hungary in 2016. I need to do his voice. Again and again, I witnessed a gesture I thought had vanished from Europe forever. People turning their heads to check who was listening before they leant forward to whisper that they had to say. They feared for their jobs, not their lives, but still. So dramatic. And then you're like, and people were asking, it's like, do you have any evidence of people losing their jobs for criticizing Orban? And, it's like, and Orban's been at this war with the, George Soros and Soros funded universities for a while. And, it's been a difficult legal battle. Like, they don't have the problem where, like, the secret police can go and, like, oh, we're taking your jobs away. And it's like, they feared for the jobs. It's like, people here got fired. There was dozens, if not hundreds of people who were fired for criticizing Black Lives Matter last summer during the riots. Like, even I remember there was this article from South Carolina where they listed at least a dozen state employees who got fired for criticizing the riots. Not even just the BLM protests or Black Lives Matter movement, but criticizing the riots, where they demanded like firmer police action or the National Guard to come in and stop it. And these people, and this is South Carolina, a red state, and they were fired for simply stating their opinion on social media. And there are countless examples of that. And these idiots imagine that, like, they go to Hungary and they're like, oh, there's secret police walking around. Oh, by the way, I believe in gay marriage. And they're like, oh my God, we're gonna die. Like, this is like what libtards actually believe. That, like, they're like whispering. It's like, I believe Black Lives Matter. And it's like, wow. Oh my God, I can't believe you said that. And they want to imagine that they're like living in 1984, where they have the most basic opinions on planet Earth, and they imagine they have to whisper them in like somebody's ear that, like, that they believe in what CNN, MSNBC, and every major corporation tells them to believe. And you could still believe this stuff in Hungary. I mean, there were just a massive gay pride rally, a week ago in Hungary that was also, as I want to say, was supported by most of the Western embassies there and Western-funded NGOs that are also placed in Hungary. So you're like, I wonder who's supporting this gay pride rally in Budapest. That's interesting. It's sponsored by the State Department, huh? Well, I guess they're real rebels then. So they just need to imagine that there's like this real threat. And he actually retweeted another person who had a similarly stupid stance that had no awareness of what's going on here. This is Jason Stanley. He's a Harvard professor, or actually a Yale professor, who he studies fascism, but the fascism is like total pop, like historiography and political science. It's not a real analysis, and he always has these really stupid takes, like calling like mainstream like really like people like Sohrab Ahmari, like fascists and stuff. He's not a serious intellectual, but people still think he's interesting for some reason, but he's very dumb. He made this tweet saying, "Everyone making light of the extraordinary corruption of Hungary's kleptocracy," they love that term kleptocracy, "should think about what it's like to have the government use the court to hammer your business with huge random fines and fees because they don't like you." Wow, can you imagine that? And we have that, and somebody pointed this out, and with just a few examples in our country of the gay bakers who are not the Christian bakers who refuse to bake wedding cakes for gay couples. They faced in probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines and legal fees just to battle for their business. There's also the countless number of businesses that were fined just for not following COVID protocols, like whether they opened on time or they didn't aggressively enforce a mask mandate. They're facing tens and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines. There are countless numbers of businesses that are shut down, and not just the government coming down on them. There's also the private pressure that comes from people trying to destroy your business. Like there are several of these businesses that sued the Biden administration over their anti-white discriminatory policies that stipulated that they were not prioritized for COVID relief. And all these businesses that sued have now gotten hundreds of negative Yelp and Google reviews on their restaurant, which impacts their ability to make a living. And, a lot of the actions, the punitive actions in America isn't necessarily coming from the government. It's coming from the private sphere. It's either coming from corporations or it's coming from other citizens that are allowed to harass you and intimidate you and attack you with impunity. There's countless examples of that where, there's been black mobs forming outside of people's houses because they thought that there was a white racist living there, and then them attacking the home and causing a riot in like a suburban neighborhood or a residential neighborhood. And it's like without impunity. It's like we live in the system. But, probably the dumbest tweets most infuriating probably come from Anne Applebaum. Anne Applebaum is another liberal intellectual, public intellectual, very stupid. She's married to a former minister in Poland's last liberal government. They haven't been in power in a while. But she's always talking about her dual citizenship with Poland and America, and she feels that she can lecture both countries on how they need to impose liberal authoritarianism to fight for democracy. So she tweeted this, and this is very funny. She said, "In Orban's Hungary, over 90% of media is controlled by the ruling party. Businesses are physically and legally harassed if they don't toe the party line, or if someone wants them cheap. Elections are manipulated. Party leaders are mysteriously rich, a model for Fox." And she goes on to talk about how, the Hungary is once again kleptocrats. They love, as I said before, they love the term kleptocrats, masquerading as fake Christians. And they're not real Christians because, of course, real Christians put their power in the hands of Joe Biden, and who's a very authentic Christian who's making it far easier to get an abortion and cracking down on religious liberty and also people like Anne Applebaum. Of course, we have to know that she is a very real Christian. She can lecture people on what real Christianity means. And then she's going on as 90% media control, government controlled media. And of course, a lot of people mocked it. It's what country do we live in? The Biden administration is able to order the media to alter its coverage. We could see this anytime there's a press conference. You either have Jen Psaki or Biden himself telling reporters what to report on, and media does not have any serious attacks on the Biden administration. They carry water for the Biden administration all the time. It's as a point I like to mention is the things about inflation. We're hitting really bad inflation right now, and the media will say either it's not happening or it's good. And it's the same with the CDC's changing orders on completely schizophrenic way of handling COVID, on mask mandates and vaccine. And they will run like a dog, to their owner, throwing a bone. It's oh, here's a new line. And the media will run over there and grab it and bring it back, and then they'll throw it in a different direction. There's no conception of right or wrong. There's just a conception of where the Biden administration directs them. And we see that, and they're just used as a total propaganda vehicle for our government. And these people are just sitting there this is the worst country on earth. And it's Hungary. And they're like, you don't know what it's like to live there. And I've known several people who visited Budapest, and they all say it's an incredible city to visit. And anyone ever says they like Hungary, it's like, imagine going to our cities where you can get robbed and beaten, and then the suspect will be not given bail and will probably get like probation. And if you manage to say a slur against this or something mean to the perpetrator, you yourself will be the real criminal. So this is like our country. It's like, yeah, we're walking through New York City or Washington, D.C., getting mugged, seeing trash everywhere, seeing hobos everywhere who are shooting up drugs or having sex on the side of the street, as there was like this viral photo from San Francisco of these two people doing a doggy style in the middle of the day on a sidewalk. And you're like, wow, I can't imagine living in the hellhole that Budapest is. Like, you're walking around, it's nice people. You don't have to worry about getting mugged, violently assaulted. There's no hobos doing it doggy style on the sidewalk. It's like, wow, I'm horrified by this prospect of going to Hungary. And that's what they really want you to believe. And it's the same with like the freedom. It's like they want you to believe that we have freedom here. And it's like, we have the Biden administration here is also telling tech companies who to censor. They're giving straight orders. They had a list of accounts that are saying these accounts are spreading COVID misinformation, and we demand that Facebook censor them. They named them and they sent that list. Does that sound like freedom? Does that sound like, oh wow, that can only happen in Hungary? No, that only happens here. And also, Hungary has no control over big tech platforms. In the same way, like, Facebook or Twitter would be a hero to say to Hungary, no, we won't censor this person. And of course, because Facebook and Twitter have close relationships with the CIA and the State Department, they're not gonna eliminate these dissidents that our State Department is funding. So this is the type of propaganda we have to witness time and time again whenever it comes to talking about an Eastern European government, or really just any authoritarian government we don't like. And I've mentioned this before, but it's so funny when they talk about Hong Kong and the freedoms that they're losing, and it's like Hong Kong dissidents are losing their bank accounts, and dissidents here lose their bank accounts, and it's like, okay, and it's like dissidents are no longer allowed on their social media. It's like, well, they're not allowed on our social media either. And I don't even think, and it's the same even with the what some of the actions Belarus is doing, arresting people off of planes and stuff. And it's like, we put dissidents on there, we don't even allow dissidents on planes. So there's all this total lack of awareness when attacking Hungary. And the one thing to note about Hungary, just to discuss a little bit more about Hungary, I mean, it is like a model for us to, aspire to and to celebrate, that there is, at least one European country. I mean, there's a few, Poland's doing some good things, and Czechia and a couple of other Eastern European countries are doing positive things. And Italy looks like it's going to have a very right-wing government in their next election. So there's all these positive developments, and we like to see this, that like there are, developed nations from developed European nations that are able to, tell the globalist American empire no, and say no, we're gonna uphold traditional values. We're not gonna have open borders. We're gonna protect our borders, and we're gonna celebrate our national culture. We're gonna have national pride in who we are, and we're gonna say we're Hungary, we're Hungarians, and we don't want to be, these global consumer citizens or citizens of some global empire that hates us, that wants us to have wants us to have drag queen story hour for all of our kindergartners. No, they don't want that. So, it's nice that they resist. But the one thing is, like, how long can Hungary resist this? Is that one point that Fromm actually brought up on his Twitter, is like showing how much of their economy is dependent on the EU. And that's the same with Poland as well, because a lot of people like to think it's like, oh, there's going to be this new, center of power within Eastern and Central Europe, and they're just going to be able to break away from the EU and the United States' control. And that's just not true. I mean, Hungary, to a far less extent, Hungary is not as dependent on the U.S., and they're also making deals with both China and Russia, and there is a degree of independence, but they do depend heavily on the EU, and if they left the EU, I mean, there would be serious economic repercussions for that. But Poland is also very dependent on America, and they love They love America's military being there. They love the subsidies that we give them. They want more troops there. They actually want more troops from America there to protect them from the threat of Russian invasion. That's never going to happen, but whatever. Their history, they do have a history of being invaded by the Russians. So, it's not my necessarily place to criticize that feeling, but I think it's misplaced. But both these countries are very dependent on the globalist system to survive. They really can't resist in the same way that Russia and China can, or even Syria and Iran. Syria and Iran aren't necessarily well-developed countries, but they're able to say no in a much more effective manner. But Hungary and Poland have to watch themselves more, and there is the threat. EU has threatened to place sanctions on Hungary and on Poland for their various actions, their undemocratic actions, which includes firing judges. Imagine that happening. That's just terrifying. Or having state-run media outlets that promote state-run propaganda. That's what NPR and Voice of America do. That NPR is like one of the worst offenders of state-run propaganda in the Western Sphere, and so does and BBC also promotes state-run propaganda. It's not the worst thing in the world that the state-run media is promoting the party line, especially if it's promoting traditional values or values that the overwhelming majority of Hungarians agree with. And one thing you have to realize is that, they always want to talk about stolen elections. Orban has won every election flat out. The main problem with democracy is that the majority of voters voted the wrong way, and we have to punish them for voting the wrong way. That's why they've always called for sanctions. It's he won over 50% of the vote. Well, this isn't democracy because, the parties we don't like winning is actually a threat to democracy, and we've seen this countless times. When they try to say 2016 was an undemocratic election because Trump won it fair and square. And they never were able to prove election fraud, but then they decided that Russia sponsoring a few Facebook posts was a sign that this wasn't a free and fair election. And manipulating elections, you can just look at the many questions surrounding the 2020 election to see about what happens in the West. So that's why we should move on to the American situation. We've talked about Hungary and the liberal press is always talking about this rising right-wing authoritarianism. They worry about Claremont Institute. It's oh my God, look at what these things the Claremont Institute is. There's this they're really upset that Claremont Institute has they have this new fellowship for sheriffs. And I looked at the platform or the agenda for it, and they're teaching the Federalist Papers to sheriffs. And it's I don't want to... I just how do sheriffs need to learn about the Federalist Papers? It's not the worst idea in the world. I don't want to criticize Claremont too much, but this is just goofy. It's you're the sheriff and they're just going to sit there and take a nap as you're talking about the intricacies of what Alexander Hamilton wrote 240 years ago. I'm not sure what actually be 230 or so. Now I'm thinking about the years, but I'm not sure what terrifying thing is, but they're all the liberals they're going to teach our sheriffs how to be fascists, and it's instead they're learning about Harry Jaffa. It's I don't think there's anything to worry about, but they constantly talk about the rising right-wing authoritarianism, even with Trump. They're Trump isn't accepting our elections still. Trump is spreading misinformation. This is rising right-wing authoritarianism, and this is coming from. And they're saying this while the president of the United States is not, or former president of the United States, is not allowed on any of the big social media platforms. And they're oh no, he may overthrow our system. It's he can't even get a Twitter account. How can he overthrow our system? But they always talk about this. But the real threat, I think we see this with Biden's latest actions, is how easy it would be for a left-wing authoritarian to govern this country. Now, imagine if we had somebody who was charismatic, young, not senile, didn't have necessarily Hunter Biden as a son. Imagine them coming into this situation with all of the fawning media that Biden has and every institution fully in lockstep with him. And imagine that person, having the executive role. that person would able to like say that like I think Gavin Newsom, even though he may lose his recall election, his political career could be over. I could see that person becoming a full blown left wing authoritarian, where they start order like he orders the shutdown of Fox News. He sends in the military or the FBI or whoever to shut down Fox News. He could likely get away with that. He could arrest Supreme Court justices or order Congress to impeach Supreme Court justices. He could possibly do that because he would have the media and the institutions that matter on his side. And even these Supreme Court justices would be total pussies. And if there was a mass protest movement against this person, they could lock hundreds of people up and keep them in like horrible conditions without bail. And the media would say, this is great. They're terrorists. We need the worst possible treatment for these people. And we are seeing this now. And there's in some ways that Biden is able to get away with this more than others. I mean, he is a kindly grandpa. He gets these mulligans of like his behavior where they like always talk to him like, hey, grandpa, what's your favorite ice cream? And it's like, chocolate chip, and like, oh, that's a great ice cream. There's this way. It's like, oh, by the way, Mr. President Biden, will you pass a vaccine passport? Listen here, Jack. Yeah, and then they'll like love like everything he does, and we're seeing. So there's some ways he's able to get away with this because they see him as a kindly senile grandpa. That I don't think Kamala could get away with this because people hate Kamala. I mean, Kamala's poll numbers are tanking. Like her favorability is over. I mean, if in 2024, if Biden is too incapacitated to run again and they have to go to a Kamala, like they are screwed. Like I don't even think Texas censorship can save them from a Republican defeat. I mean, they still, or whatever, the Voting Rights Act or the quote unquote Voting Rights Act they're trying to push through Congress right now. None of that could actually save them if Kamala was running. People really hate Kamala. I mean, she is just so unlikable. But I mean, this is a digression. I don't know if she could get away with this, but I could see Gavin Newsom. And even, before Cuomo's fall from grace over sexual harassment, I mean, he could have gotten away with this. They loved him being this, like, Chad, Democrat authoritarian who's going to tell those Republican rednecks that their reign of terror is over and reign of terror is, like, not wearing masks. And he's going to punish them to the full extent of the law. They love this. And they're now seeing this with the actual creeping left-wing authoritarianism, with the talk about vaccine passports. New York City just imposed one. I mean, you cannot eat at an indoor restaurant or go to a concert or go to a gym if you're not vaccinated. Now, and some conservatives were making this point. They're like, oh, well, this could be systemic racism because it's going to primarily impact blacks. I'm like, they're not going to enforce this against blacks. I mean, haven't you guys learned any lessons over the last few years? It's like any uncomfortable interaction blacks have, they can record that and make it a viral moment where they're the hero and the person that they're attacking is this evil aggressor, and they can get that person arrested. So you're going to see, I pointed this out on Twitter, it's like you're probably going to see a couple viral Karen videos where it's some hapless cashier who's like asking, hey, please, can I see your papers? It's like, yo, you racist. This person called me the N-word. And they're like, oh, no, please don't videotape me. And then that person's going to get fired, possibly arrested just for following the rules. And then they're going to like simply say, like, you can't ask black people for papers because that's a racism. And these rules are only going to apply to whites and nobody else because people don't want to be the next viral Karen video. And everyone's encouraging vaccine passports. I mean, the media outlets are pushing things saying that there's a recent, I believe it's Washington Post or the Atlantic article saying those who are unvaccinated should be on the no-fly list because they're terrorists now too. So we're going to put tens of millions of Americans on the no-fly list. And I'm sure it'll be really easy to get off that no-fly list once you're, even if you do get a vaccine. So they really like this idea of turning the unvaccinated into these kulaks who just that they need to vent all their anger and imagine that every bad thing in the world is due to these unvaccinated kulaks, just as in the way the Soviet Union did against, prosperous farmers and property owners. Like every bad thing, every economic downturn was the result of the kulaks. Well, now everything is bad because of the unvaccinated. It's the same with this Delta variant that we're having all these new infections and rising hospitalizations apparently, and this is all due to the unvaccinated, even though their CDC's own finding is showing that people with the vaccine are actually spreading it, are spreading the COVID as well. But so they'll keep changing this, but at the same, so there, it's really an argument for greater authoritarianism. It is showing how much they can control people's lives and bend the Constitution to their will. And it's not just with these vaccine passports. I think this is the most heinous version because this affects, every American. Like your ability, and even with the vaccinated, imagine just how much of a pain in the ass it is to go to like a movie theater and them having to like check your vaccine card and then to verify it. Like, why do you have to have, like, you don't need a voter ID to go to vote, but you need like a passport to go see a movie or go eat to eat. Like this is, and they even want this applied to supermarkets, and they really want the unvaccinated to starve because they view them as Trump supporting rednecks, and they really just want us to die or to be sent along to a prison camp. Even though, and they're now ignoring the fact of like who's not getting vaccinated, because on all these early articles showing who's not getting vaccinated, which was primarily blacks and a few, and also Hispanics were also showing reluctance to get vaccinated. They no longer show that because that's playing into racist tropes and stereotypes. So they no longer say that. Now all the unvaccinated are the people that liberal elites hate. So it's the Trump supporting redneck. It's the InfoWars watcher. It's the guy who's going to a Trump rally without a mask. Those are the people, and they really want to punish them. And they have all these. There's these tweets about these like libtards who still have mask profile pictures going on about how they relish the fact that they can eat at a restaurant and watch all the unvaccinated sit outside and starve. And a lot of charity here, a lot of charitable views. So they can and even though I don't know if the federal government has the power to, enforce a vaccine passport system, they're going to pressure businesses to do this. I do think the airlines are going to have vaccine passport system by Thanksgiving. I think, unless and there's not really many legal challenge. I mean, there can be legal challenges to this and such. But it's also coming with the cost of left-wing authoritarianism, as as all these like Anne Applebaum and David Frum are complaining about with Hungary, that there's this high cost to dissent. There's a high cost to dissent here. Imagine if you're fundraising for this lawsuit against the airline industry. Like, they're going to come after you. They're going to dox these people. I mean, that's what they did with these law firms that were representing Trump in his election challenges last year. I mean, they went through the law firm, and these Antifa left-wing activists doxed every lawyer at this law firm, and that's why they dropped Trump as a client, because they didn't want that pressure. And the same would happen against these people who are suing against the airlines. I don't know if the government can impose this, and I have a feeling that people are just going to hate this. So, I mean, libtards like this because they like the fact, like, the greatest sense of privilege in a democracy is knowing that your right is denied to rights are denied to someone else, especially if it's your enemy. And they're going to love that. But people are not going to like the additional hassle of having to show a million different things. Like, if like you're always having to go out to a restaurant and you have to pull out your passport. And ordinary people are probably going to forget this passport. I mean, it's like, it happens. People forget their phones. People forget their wallets. Like, people forget their credit cards all the time, and people forget their keys. Like, these things are, people like forget this stuff on a daily basis. And imagine you're going to the restaurant, you have everything, you have this whole plan, and you go there and you're like misplace your your vaccine card, and people are of course going to lose their vaccine card, and now you can't do anything in life because you lost it. And you're like, well, I have this, and maybe they could put it up electronically, of course. Maybe, that may not be an option for everyone. Maybe if they don't have a smartphone. Maybe most people do. But I mean, all these things come to factor. And like, the Constitution did not imagine that you would have needed this passport to go anywhere. And you had to have this in order to eat. That wasn't a part of the Constitution. But they're able to bend the Constitution to their will, and Supreme and justices are human beings. They're not just impartial observers. They're not just like robots that we we plug in like, oh, they interpret the Constitution. We say this. These are flesh and blood people who have faced the same pressures ordinary citizens do. And whether they can resist Biden's dictates is I think we've seen constantly that they're not going to do anything about a lot of his actions. And so going along with like the ability for him to rule, and one thing I keep pointing out, I want to really emphasize is that our legislative branch doesn't do anything. Like, it really doesn't have any power. I mean, they can't pass any bills. They're just there to sit and to discuss bills that usually can't even make it to the president. So all the authority and all the action done by the government is now through the executive branch, and then it's reviewed by the judicial branch. So those are really the only two branches that matter. And I mean, legislative branch matters mainly for the ability to appoint people to the courts. Even though, as we said with like Trump, he got all these judges. A lot of these judges aren't that good because, as I said before, they're ordinary people and they face the same pressures as Joe Q public. They're just as susceptible to left wing pressure, and a lot of these guys aren't even that right wing, so they're gonna not push forward strong bills or approve strong laws. And so now I think we all agree now that like the power is entirely entrusted to do like in a proactive fashion. Everything has to happen through the executive branch. And the reason why left-wing authoritarianism would be so easy is that they love the idea of the president just like, fuck the courts, I'm doing this. And now we're seeing this with the eviction moratorium, which is just completely silly. At a time when we have a massive labor shortage, I mean, you can go like, McDonald's will pay you to interview with them. Like, that's how like bad, like they're desperate they are for workers. Like, there is any person with a function who can function at all, has like 2 arms and a legs and has no serious handicaps, can get a job right now. And they will probably, and also even fast food restaurants are bumping up their wages in order to get people there. And as I said, they're paying people just to do interviews. You can get a job right now, but at this time, they're still, there's been an eviction moratorium for most of the COVID panic, and they're now extending it because, there's all these poor suffering people are going to be put out in the cold. And I think a lot of the right-wing populists and Populist Inc types are like, oh, this is based, like they're helping out working class families. And they imagine that it's like, oh, I got laid off my factory job that hasn't existed in 40 years. But that's why I need this eviction moratorium to ensure that my family's not put out in the cold. But really, it's in fact like just lazy people who don't want to work who are doing this. And it's also hurting the middle class, like people, ordinary citizens who own these properties and depend on this income for their own, way to survive. And they're not getting that because the federal government is telling all these people, you don't have to pay. And in fact, if you try to evict them, you face jail time up to a year. So you trying to be a responsible citizen, trying to enforce basic middle class norms, you're going to be punished. We're going to let you've got to let that person stay in the apartment for as long as possible. And now this empower was, the courts have already ruled that like the CDC's extended this ban, and the courts ruled that the CDC doesn't have the authority to do this. And Congress just let it expire because they realize that like we don't need it. Like, we have such a massive labor shortage right now that these people, like, it's not like these people have to worry about unemployment. Like, they don't have the money to pay for the rent. They can go out and find a job and find that money to pay rent. It's simply, but the new populism is that the government has to provide services for free food, free housing for everyone, and it doesn't. And these struggling people have just been unemployed. There's so much poverty. This is also the argument for crime, even though, as I said before, all these jobs are available to them. And they choose crime instead, and I don't know how like shooting some rival is an act is driven by poverty, but I think that's another digression. And so the reason why they expired is like there's no need for it anymore. There was clearly a need for the eviction moratorium during last year, during the spring and summer when there was a ton of layoffs and people getting furloughed, but now there's not a need for that. people are able to get jobs. Like where the job market is very good right now, so there's no need for this eviction moratorium. But we're extending this and in essentially eliminating property rights, a basic principle embedded within our founding and in our Constitution, in order to appease the POC left-wing coalition that he had. I mean, it's like Cory Bush and AOC out there being like, we need this. And then, of course, Biden extended it with his executive power. And even in the speech, he's like, I probably don't have the power to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And the media is just like, oh, yeah, great job. And then, like, all these conservatives are, like, realizing, we just had the executive branch eliminate property rights in our country. And nobody's caring. This is, like, the worst thing. This is, like, a complete tyrannical move. And he's able to do this. Now, I mean, the courts could overthrow it. Hopefully they do. But this does show that the left is willing to do things that the right could never dream of. I mean, people want to say, like, well, the right can do this. The right doesn't have cultural power. It doesn't have power over these institutions. These institutions will resist it. I mean, just think about what Trump's response was to the BLM riots. Like, he wanted the military out there. He wanted them to use lethal force. Instead, the military refused his orders to send troops to D.C., and there was essentially an agreement. Like, there's an implied agreement that if Trump tried to do anything more, that they were going to overthrow him, like during last June. Then that was, I mean, I guess last June might not be, but June 2020. They said, I mean, that was the clear message to them. It's like, you can't use us to stamp down these riots. You can't use force at all. And we're on the side of the rioters, actually. And then they toppled him during January 6th, too. I mean, you have to imagine, it's like people are like, oh, well, at least there wasn't a coup against Trump. It's like, what do you expect the post-1/6 response was? They kicked him off social media. And the military was taking orders from Pence and was prepared to take orders from Nancy Pelosi. They were not listening to Trump. And he was essentially put in a box. And Republican Mitch McConnell and others basically told him, like, you have to do what we say. You're not going to affect a full withdrawal from Afghanistan. You're not going to pardon any of these protesters. You're not going to pardon, you're not going to pardon Assange. You're not going to pardon Snowden. You're not going to pardon any of these people. You're going to do what we say. Otherwise, we're gonna remove you from office. We're going to vote for impeachment. And due to this agreement, like, Trump was effectively toppled, and big tech played its role by censoring him from every platform. So the coup, it's happened. I mean, the one thing is, like, these institutions and governments, I don't want to say it's completely hopeless, but I want to say is that people, I think over time, in response to the conservatarianism and the stupidity of conservative in the past, right-wingers have embraced this, like, statism where we're like, oh, we'll just use the state for our advantage. The one problem with our state is that the state is built to not be used for our advantage. Just even look at Trump, and we could say, oh, yeah, he was incompetent, he didn't have the right personnel. That's all true. But even if you had a competent person in there with better personnel, they still couldn't accomplish this because the ability for the left to just inspire mobs, get mobs, and affect pressure on ordinary people is something the right can't compete with right now. And what you really have to do is you have to shrink. I know this is going to sound very conservative, Inc. I know it's going to sound libertarian-ish, but you really do have to shrink the size of government. I mean, people are like, wow, I can already see all the eyes rolling in the back of the head, but the shrinking the size of government is not like basically like a principled stand. It's like, we want smaller government. No, it's like an act of survival. It's like these institutions are so hostile to us that we can only eliminate them or try our best to eliminate them and downsize them in order to have a fighting chance for the historic American nation to survive. Like, we have to do this. Like, you can't give them more power because these institutions are controlled by our enemies, and they can continually use them against us to thwart basic policy that we may have. I mean, this happened with Trump. Time and time again, they used the institutional power to thwart his agenda. I mean, the courts essentially were about to institute open borders and say, found in the Constitution, and say that he can't do anything about through executive power. All these groups and people or institutions are able to weaponize against a right-wing government that wants to use the state power for good. Meanwhile, these same institutions will be used by a left-wing authoritarian that they agree with to tyrannize and oppress the American people. And we're seeing that right now with, there's not a doubt in my mind the military, if Biden ordered the military to, like, say there was mass protests over a vaccine passport, there's no doubt in my mind the military would happily sign off on shooting these people. That and you'd be like, they would have no compunction about it. If he ordered, if Biden said the same things that Trump is alleged to have said during the BLM protests, wanting the military to crack some skulls and to start using lethal force, they would absolutely do that. They would use that within no questions asked. There would be no worries about doing that. And that's that's the real threat of left-wing authoritarianism. We fortunately do have a senile person who is not fully capable of utilizing the state, but we may not have that opportunity with somebody who is more, has a little bit better mental agility, mental ability, and it could very easily happen. And the only solution to this is you really do have to handcuff and downsize these institutions from what they are, so they don't have this tremendous amount of power over us. And and like, I know it's very cliche to say anarcho-tyranny, but this is like full-blown anarcho-tyranny with Biden administration. I mean, they just have over 200,000 illegal immigrants that they caught. These are the ones they caught. You have to realize this is just the ones they caught. So you can only imagine there's at least another 100,000 that they didn't catch. Migrants who crossed the border in July. Over 200,000, and they're not enforcing the border. They're not doing anything about crime. They're decriminalizing all these offenses. They're letting people without bail, serious criminals. They're letting them free without any bail, no cash bail there. And at the same time, they're criminalizing right-wing protest. They're criminalizing refusing a vaccine. They're criminalizing. They want to criminalize hate speech, even though I think the courts will stand up for hate speech. I mean, it's very clear that the Constitution protects hate speech, but they're now eliminating property rights, basic property rights. It's like, if you're a landowner, you can't enforce any rules, or you may go, if you enforce basic rules, you're going to go to prison. And I think this is something important. And the last thing I want to say, so besides this is full-blown anarcho-tyranny, that's one last thing I want to say is that, you can't walk, you can get mugged and violently assaulted, but if you're not nothing will happen to that criminal, or something very light sentence would happen to that criminal, especially if you're white. But if you may face serious jail term if you are a property owner and you evict somebody who hasn't paid the rent in a year. So that's the America we're saluting. That's the America represented by our great Team USA at the Olympics. So now we're going to move on to that subject right after I make my final point. As I just was discussing, I wanted to make one last point. And this is about the embrace, as I was saying, alluded to a little bit before, but I really want to emphasize this point, is that there's all these right-wing populists, and this is particularly Populist Inc., who see any left-wing populist idea or left-wing economic idea, and they soy jack over it. They're like, oh my God, I love this eviction moratorium based. Take that, landlords. And they embrace every anything that's seems to be hitting back at corporations or against evil, the evil bourgeoisie. They're in for, and then you're like, I fortunately haven't seen too much of this when it comes to the eviction moratorium, but this is another sign that they're too eager to embrace things that Bernie Sanders may support. But oftentimes the way the system works is that these ideas, when they're implemented by our current regime, by our current government, they're intended to harm middle Americans, white Americans. There's always that intent. There may be, by itself, they may be fine. They may, universal healthcare is, in theory, should be is a fine idea. I don't have any moral opposition to that. But I do have opposite. I am opposed to this and other ideas when instituted by our own government, because it's going to come with racial quotas. It's going to come with, these terrible liberal bureaucrats like DMV ladies running your healthcare. I mean, in many ways, I know they still have a role in it, but imagine just with government-run healthcare. Are completely government-run healthcare, and it's the same with many other ideas. It's like this infrastructure bill. Like people are like, "Oh, this is populist. We love this," and then the infrastructure bill, most of it is going to left-wing nonprofits. And there's more money going. I think there's more money going to historically black colleges and universities that are going to repair ports. And so this is an infrastructure bill. It's a left-wing swindle. And it's the same with like the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is more concerned with with racial wealth redistribution than helping the environment. And that's how every left-wing policy is implemented. So these ideas in theory, like, I don't think there's I think you can have a discussion about it. Like, I think there is like a reasonable discussion on both sides, for and against universal health care. I think, and for many of other these left-wing ideas that are, left-wing economic ideas. But all these ideas as implemented by our government are bad and evil because it's our enemies making the policy and guiding it, and they're using it to harm us and to redistribute our wealth to the great POC coalition, and that's why we should oppose it. And it's the same with this eviction moratorium. You shouldn't think of it as like working class whites who were laid off by their factory 40 years ago who are the ones being affected. No, it's magic Americans. So you have to keep that in mind. It's like, always remember the question of who, not what. So, or really a statement. But so now I can move on to the next subject of talking about Team USA and apparently how conservatives are now anti-America, according to liberal pundits. So if I've been saying, you've got to root against Team USA because it doesn't represent you. It represents the globalist American empire. These are people who hate you. They're not representing they may carry the flag around. They may occasionally say some patriotic things. Like all these conservatives were soy-jacking over this black wrestler who was the first black female wrestler to ring gold. Great effect. I mean, she had like a nice speech where she loves America, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was okay, but they're going over like, this is what a real athlete is like. And they love this fact when they have the one token black person to say something patriotic, and then they go nuts over. That's fine. I mean, they have those few exceptions, but you need to realize what the rest of the team is like. And it's Simone Biles, these horrible harpies on the soccer team, and then the men's, and then the entitled NBA players on the men's basketball team. And so are most of these players. And liberal media are now picking up that a lot of conservatives don't want to root for them. They are horrified that anyone would celebrate our women's soccer team only getting a bronze, and that they like the fact that they didn't win the gold. They're horrified that anyone would dare attack Simone Biles. And like Simone Biles, as I predicted, last week, that Simone Biles would come back and then she would win a medal, and then it'd be treated as the greatest victory of all time. Well, she came back and she only won a bronze, and it was treated as the greatest victory of all time. And there's Twitter trending topic: the world celebrates Simone Biles winning a bronze. It's like, why is the world celebrating her winning a bronze? Like, she was having withdrawals from her ADHD medication, and then like she's came back and won a bronze, but we're now considering her the greatest athlete of human history, as like these mainstream respectable outlets are going to say. She is the greatest athlete to ever exist. So she came back and won a bronze, but now they are picking, not to distract too much, they are picking up on the fact that it seems like, conservatives are, becoming anti-America. They don't like the America that they see. Zach Beauchamp of Vox was one of the most recent writers to point this out, is that there's now a new anti-American right, which they mean by anti-America is that you're not celebrating America at the Olympics. You're daring to criticize our heroic Capitol police officers and our glorious military generals, and by this fact, you're anti-America. And so they're trying to flip the script on what conservatives have been saying for years, accusing the left and liberals of being anti-America. Now they're trying to say it of conservatives. But there is a point here, is that more and more normal conservatives, mainstream conservatives, are, using rhetoric that would have only been used by the dissident right just a few years ago, especially in relation to America. And they're not falling for these tricks of just rooting for the Team USA just because they have an American flag on their uniforms. They're realizing that these people don't represent them, and there is this growing anti-Americanism on the right. I don't even really like using that term because that is conceding to the left's point. It's like, it's not anti-America, it's anti-globalist American empire. And all these, as I was saying throughout most of this podcast, these institutions are completely captured by our enemies. And we shouldn't celebrate when these institutions win or do something good, because then these institutions are going to use these victories to argue for their own pet projects, their own pet issues, such as the women's soccer team winning in the World Cup in 2019 and using this to advocate for the gender pay gap and equal pay. And the same would happen as if these athletes were doing well at the Olympics. But they're not. They're not. I mean, we're in second place in the medals against China. In second place in golds, not in overall medals. But China is catching up. I mean, there's very little difference. And compare this to past Olympics. We were well ahead of everyone in gold medals and overall medals in the 2016 Summer Olympics. And now we're barely in first place in overall medals, but we're no way we're going to overtake China in gold. And you also have to think is like the Russian team, which was barred, and it's not operating with, I don't believe it's operating with all its athletes and at full capacity, is also doing a pretty good job of competing with us. And so we're losing our prestige on the world stage. We're supposed to have the greatest athletes in the world, but we're coming in second place to China. And there's a lot of sports that the Chinese aren't going to be good at, like basketball. I mean, they're not known for their height, and so there's all these sports we should be dominating at, and we're not. And this is representative of the America as a whole. Like, we're no longer respected on the world stage. We're no longer the great power, and in many ways, this is good. Is like the less power and sway we have over the world, the more we can restore ourselves to our true republic, to the true America, because ultimately we have this the globalist American empire that's representing us on the world stage, and they're using this and they're even trying to make immigration arguments. Like Jeb Bush had this thing, is like, imagine complained. They're even using a new rhetoric that they're actually going to try to complain, that saying that the restrictive immigration policies of Trump over the last 4 years is why we're not doing as well in the Olympics. And he's said that the immigration is why America is doing so well at these Olympics. But they have to think is like, Naomi Osaka is an immigrant. She lives in America. And she's playing for Japan. She's not playing for us. Like, none of it's like, that's like the immigrant success story. It's like, okay, well, Naomi Osaka's not. And there's a bunch of other athletes too who live in America, who immigrated here. Some of them have citizenship, and they're representing their home country. They're not representing America. And so this is like undermines his argument. And it's also like, most of these people aren't immigrants. I mean, it's like, blacks have been here for a while. They're not immigrants, and those are most of the people besides whites who are winning medals. It's not, there's a few exceptions that they like have an immigrant background, but most of them aren't immigrant backgrounds. And the great athletes with immigrant backgrounds are representing their real countries, not America. So they'll use any arguments for this, and it'll be interesting to say why we didn't do as well in the Olympics. They could say Trump's restrictive immigration policies, which I don't know what dreamers were out there that were waiting to win gold, and Trump denied them that opportunity. It's not clear where's that at, or how somebody with just a green card and no English can somehow represent us the next year in the Olympics. That's all. I think only Jeb Bush is smart enough to figure that one out. Or they'll use these dumb arguments, but I think it is good that this. I don't like calling it anti-Americanism, but it is this skepticism of the new America it is going mainstream, and liberals are noticing it, and they're trying to do this lame rally around the flag and say we're the true patriots, and no one buys that. They don't. While at the same time, like Vox and all these left-wing outlets that are condemning the anti-patriots of the conservative, anti-patriotic conservatives, at the same time, they're publishing articles about how we need to replace the Star Spangled Banner and replace the flag because they're racist and problematic, and we need to get rid of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and all these other great figures throughout American history. They're not the real patriots. This is just a little game that they're playing, and you shouldn't buy into it. And I support. I support conservatives getting into the anti-American spirit and rooting against Team USA. We have the basketball team is in the semifinals. Let's hope they only get a bronze. I think they're facing off against Australia. France is actually really good. I think France is what beat us in regular play, and so hopefully they get denied a gold. I think them not getting a gold would be a big effect because we have the best basketball players in the world. I mean, there are some really good basketball players from other countries, but most of these countries that like Slovenia is now doing really well, but it's off the bat of one player, and so do many of these other countries have that same effect. But it'd be really amazing where we have all the best players and somehow we lose. It would be, and we also have Greg Popovich, who's like a horrible lib as the coach. It'd be great if we lost. So hopefully we're rooting for that, and hopefully it's a disappointing finish for America at the Olympics. And we'll find out next week. So we'll have it on next week's episode, recording our Olympic disappointment and why the right should be happy about it. But yeah, I think, you shouldn't. Once again, this reaffirms my stance for why you shouldn't support Team USA. And even this Vox article was saying like now USA represents LGBT rights, gay pride, Black Lives Matter, and and Joe Biden's authoritarianism, and they're like, well, you should still support it. Like, no, you shouldn't. This isn't as I said on Twitter when somebody was saying that this is unpatriotic to not root for the soccer team. My country is not a soccer team, and you all should keep that in mind. Our country is far more than the women's soccer team. The women's soccer team is not my country. That's a globalist American empire. So now I'm going to move along to our cognitive elite questions. As a reminder, sign up for highly respected Substack so you can listen in on the IQ supplements and comment on these great knowledge that I impart on my listeners. The listeners love it. The reviews are great. They're terrific. And so you also, if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option, you get the power to ask me questions actually it's not an or, it's an and suggest guests and topics. So if you want to get the real highly respected experience, make sure to sign up for that option. So this question comes from Johnny Chungus. We love that name. He asked in the comments of the last podcast, which you should listen to, on Francis Fukuyama. He said, Scott, considering how you talked about on this podcast about how the left has lost the white working class and how the right has lost the white suburbanite class, will there be any large-scale change in working class minority voting patterns as Populist Inc. wishes would happen? The answer is no. I mean, I think this is a very clear no. I don't think that they continue to talk about. I mean, this has been a populist thing talking point, especially since after the election, is that there's this multicultural, multiracial working class rising up against the evil white liberal suburbanites and who are raking in all the money, and they're the ones who are supporting critical race theory and all the SJW policies. This is a little bit of a meme rather than reality, and you don't really see any push in from the multicultural, multiracial working class. I think that a lot of the Hispanics, I'd have to look about the socioeconomic breakdown of the Hispanic voters who went for Trump, but I'd imagine a lot of them would be considered middle class. There's not a very good way of estimating or looking at what people's socioeconomic bracket is based on how they voted in elections outside of where they're living or whether they have a college degree or not. But a lot of non-college educated whites are skilled technicians and work at a skilled labor, and they make very good money, especially for where they live. I mean, if they're living in a rural town and they're making like $60K a year, they're living very well, and so they would be considered middle class, even though they have a what would be most people would see as a blue collar profession. But going on with the minority appeal is that a lot of the Hispanics who went over to Trump were voting for him based on his persona, not really his policy. I mean, there's some policies that he liked. They saw him as the guy who was standing up against Black Lives Matter, even though, as I pointed out earlier in the podcast, he wasn't really doing a very good job about it, even though he wanted to. They did see him as the guy who was resisting Black Lives Matter, as the guy who was going to stand up for law and order, as the person who was going to get, guarantee them the American dream, rather than like Biden, who seemed, more interested in appeasing the other demographics in the POC coalition rather than the Hispanics. But when you take Trump out of the equation, the numbers go down. I believe in the Georgia special election race, Republican support for Hispanic support for those Republican senators running dropped without Trump on the ticket. And I think there's been a few other elections that have shown also this Hispanic support has been dropping without Trump. So a lot of this is attached to Trump's persona. It's not necessarily these policies that Populist Inc wants to talk about, where it's like, an industrial policy and we're gonna child tax credits. It's like, I mean, yeah, they may benefit from that, but they're not going to vote for somebody on that. It's definitely based on persona, and a lot of Hispanics liked Trump's persona. They like this charismatic guy who appeared like a caudillo. Not every Republican can imitate that. And Johnny Chungus also mentions how, the real reason isn't necessarily what Sohrab Ahmari is saying. It is the people, the Hispanics who are revolting against the Democratic Party are doing so due to the excesses of the gay, not necessarily due to any of these economic policies. It's BLM, transgender studies in schools, etc. That this is the reason why they would be voting for Republican. And he says this is also more true of the white working class versus the non-white working class. And he asks, how can this message get across the populist thing? It's just not going to get across the populist thing, because what they promote is designed to be harmless. It's designed to make them respectable, not to actually speak the truth or to actually challenge power. And it's like a little novelty for them to say, I'm standing up for the working class. This isn't culture war. This is class war, which I really need to do more of an episode on this. I may do this next week, but limited time frame we have here. They continue to talk about everything in class war. All these people have come from the upper class. They don't even come from the middle class. And they're like eggheads who've never worked a manual labor job. And they're like, I stand up for the working class. The working class is going to my church. And I know what they're like. And it's like, no, you don't. These people don't have similar values to you. They are also much more racist than you. And they're voting for these issues based on cultural, racial, and identity concerns. It's the identity issues are what inspires them, and that's what animates them. It's not, these economic policies. It's not the industrial policy. It is the identity issues, and that's something that needs to be really discussed. And when it comes to Hispanics, the multicultural working class, it's really just whites and Hispanics. There's very few blacks who are joining this multiracial working class, and it's just a way for them to imagine the white guy as still the bad person, and to say we're the real anti-racist, and because we're standing up for the multicultural working class against the evil white liberal. And it's not really necessarily a working class concern. I think a lot of our base is middle class. They're not working class people. And the working class people who support us aren't the working class people we imagine in Populist Inc fantasies. These are not guys who work in unions. They're not working in a factory job. And a lot of these working class people are well compensated. They're skilled laborers. And they share many of the same interests that the middle class has. And some of them are people who may even own some of these properties where they no longer can evict their tenants because they've earned so much supplemental income that they've now directed that towards to owning property, and now they get supplemental income from that. And many of them don't like taxes, they don't like regulations, and they do have some fairly libertarian perspectives. These are not people who are signing up for National Bolshevism. So that does need an understanding of who these working class voters are. I mean, they are blue collar in their culture, and they certainly like the elements of the welfare state that benefit them. I mean, they like Social Security. They like roads. I mean, they're not full on Cato Institute libertarians, but they're not necessarily, they're not at the same time, they're not socialists. So people do need to understand this, that they're not. And what primarily drives them and what really animates them to vote for Republicans are these cultural war struggles. And that probably goes the same for a lot of these Hispanics as well. So, yeah, are they really going to capture people with these economic policies? No. I mean, most of the minority working class is staying on the Democratic plantation because the Democrats are like, we give you all these great things. Why would they leave? And the ones who leave are the ones who don't get many benefits, such as Hispanics who don't really have a problem with whites. A lot of them adopt white culture, assimilate to white culture, and they really don't like how they're getting weird stuff taught to their kids. That's why they would join the Republicans. It's not necessarily this economic Populist Inc agenda that is what makes them shift to the Republicans. So, well, and that's my final thoughts on that. So that's it for today's episode. We'll return back to our ordinary, regular Monday programming next week, and we will, of course, have another great IQ supplement. There is a great IQ supplement out right now at highlyrespected.substack.com. It's on Francis Fukuyama's identity book. Francis Fukuyama, famous public intellectual who wrote End of History. You'll probably love the discussion that I have on the book and the review. So give that a listen. Make sure to subscribe to the Substack. Make sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. And until next time, stay respected.